How can Australia tackle rising cases of religious hatred? Since October 7th, 2023, and the subsequent Israeli onslaught on the Gaza Strip, instances of Islamophobia have risen sixfold in Australia. Anti-Semitic instances have also risen. So how can Canberra tackle rising intolerance? I'm Adijan Ayandar, and today's newsmaker is Islamophobia in Australia. Just over 3% of Australians identify as Muslims, and while the country has become highly multicultural, many Muslims say they've been victims of Islamophobia. So, what could be done? The Australian government appointed a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism and then later an envoy for Islamophobia. But many complain the issue is deep-rooted and is not being treated seriously enough. Here's a closer look.
Does Australia have an Islamophobia problem?
I don't know if Australians understand Islam very well, and that can often lead to fear of things you don't understand.
That's what then Prime Minister Scott Morrison said in 2019. 5 years later, with the Labour government in charge, little seems to have changed. And Israel's war on Gaza has only made things worse. A non-profit organisation, the Islamophobia Register Australia, has recorded a 600% increase in reported Islamophobia incidents since October last year. In the latest, graffiti was painted on an underpass in Sydney.
The current events have not only magnified the issue, but allowed it to become more public and aggressive than ever before. The location of the attack is no coincidence. This act of Islamophobia was targeted a suburb with a high Muslim majority to intimidate and threaten the Muslim population. If they cannot feel safe in their own home, where can they feel safe?
Jewish people are also subjected to similar attacks. Australia's largest Jewish community was targeted with anti-Semitic slogans painted on houses. In early December, one of the country's most significant synagogues was set on fire, sparking mass outrage. Yet while both Jewish and Muslim communities have been suffering from hatred, some politicians have turned it into a contest.
Anytime any senior minister mentioned anti-Semitism in the last 12 months, they also mentioned a fictitious Islamophobia, which was not going on.
Those comments drew widespread condemnation in Australia. This year, Canberra has taken some action to fight religious discrimination. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese appointed lawyer Gillian Seagull as special envoy to combat anti-Semitism in July. Despite a promise to name an Islamophobia envoy around the same time, there was a delay. But finally, in late September, Aftab Malik was tasked with the job. Some have questioned the effectiveness of the role. Others have welcomed it. Last week, Aftab wrote an opinion piece for the British newspaper The Guardian, which called for an end to the abuse of both Muslims and Jews.
In that spirit, I offer this. Attacks on any places of worship are horrendous, especially because they are sacred spaces for people to worship in the knowledge that they are free and safe to do so. I urge our politicians and community representatives not only to be passionate but also empathetic. We cannot condemn one form of hate and then deny the existence of another.
A recent report shows social cohesion in Australia is under pressure. Negative views of all major faiths are on the rise, with 1/3 of Australians having negative attitudes towards Muslims. While the government is taking some measures to counter religious hatred, campaigners say long-term solutions will only be found when the deep-rooted causes of division are addressed.
Joining me now to debate this are from Perth, Australia, the director of Muslim Votes Matter, Nasser Alziyadat, and we have from Brisbane, the director of the Alliance of Australian Muslims and the spokesperson of the Holland Park Mosque, Ali Kadri, and then rounding off the group from Sydney, former politician and co-founder and former national director of the Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party, David Oldfield. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. David, let me begin with you. You have some organizations in your country reporting a 600% increase in reported Islamophobia incidents since October of last year. Would you acknowledge that there's actually a growing problem?
Look, there's an increase in reports of incidents of what could be termed Islamophobia. In fairness, there's also a dramatic increase in incidents of anti-Semitism. So both things are happening. There is a greater level of reporting of hatred towards Muslims and an equal, if not greater, level of increase in incidents of hatred towards Jewish people.
Okay. That's setting the stage. Ali, I see that you're shaking your head. When David was speaking, he used the word incidents. I possibly want to put quotations around that. I mean, some would argue that Islamophobia is exaggerated in the country, and that the data often lacks some context. What's your take?
So, look, I think, first of all, David used some really brilliant words there when he said that there's been increase in reports of incidents of Islamophobia, whereas there's increase in incidents of anti-Semitism. I think any form of hatred, whether it's Islamophobia or anti-Semitism, is not good for this country. And Islamophobia is certainly rising, not just the reporting of Islamophobia, but Islamophobia is rising in this country. And the fact that so many people are not willing to acknowledge this as a serious problem as it is adding to that issue. And David is part of a problem, not a part of a solution, if he thinks that way.
Okay, Nasser, I want to get you into this conversation. I don't think it's we're debating whether it's good or not, but what do you have to weigh in on what David has said?
I think that there is incidents in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. For Islamophobia, I can assure you they increased 600%. Yes, and this is the minimum, by the way. So far, the incidence has not been in the final stage of confirmation. For me, as also in addition to my job, I work in with the research team of the Islamophobia report number 5. It's going to be released in 2025. And I can assure David that we have really, really very good deal of reported and confirmed incidents of Islamophobia that were documented and that were increased sharply after October 7th of last year. And there's another thing about it from the other side, which is related.
Can I just point out there's no reason to highlight this or make me aware of these things. I'm not a part of either the Islamophobia or the anti-Semitism. I'm merely letting you know that both sides are reporting an increase in incidents of hatred towards each other. Both Jewish people and Muslim people are reporting a dramatic increase in incidents. So it's just a question of who you really want to believe, to be quite frankly. I'm not taking a side either way. I'm just telling you how it is.
Well, the thing is that just if it is this case, what is it, for example, for you, David, to interpret as an anti-Semitic incident, for example? What is it?
Well, for example, a couple of days ago in Melbourne, a group of some 20 black-dressed, black-masked men unfurled a banner about 20 metres long, which was very offensive towards Jewish people. About a week or so ago, somebody wrote some anti-Islamic graffiti out in Western Sydney. There's no questioning that these incidents are taking place. I think it's ridiculous to even bother debating who's being more angry towards the other. The incidents are taking place. There is an increase in anti-Semitism and there is an increase in anti-Islamism, if you like. I think we're just losing time in what matters to be bothering with who's doing too much.
I think I agree, David. I think you're right. I think there is an increase in both such incidents. And I'm glad that you acknowledge that there is a rise of Islamophobia in this country, as there is a rise in anti-Semitism as well. So, I don't think there's a point to debate this any further if we agree on this.
Okay, let's switch gears here a little bit. David, when you look at some of your publications, you've often criticized multiculturalism in the past. How do you reconcile those views with the principles of inclusivity that Australia supposedly values?
Well, that's a government policy. Bear in mind, Australia didn't always believe in multiculturalism, and Australia is filled with people who don't believe in multiculturalism. And quite frankly, there's nothing wrong with multiculturalism as long as there's the understanding that there is an overriding culture from which all laws and abiding citizens subscribe. Now, that's not a problem. You have that in Islam, you have that in Western countries around the world. The problem with multiculturalism is when the various cultures within that sovereign nation start to mangle each other as to who is going to have control, as to whose laws are to be subscribed to. That is the problem with multiculturalism. Every group of people, frankly, most of them want to live more with people who are the way they see themselves. And everybody wants to do that. It doesn't matter whether you're black, white, Asian, Islamic, or whatever you might want to be, African American, Native American, Indian. People basically want to predominantly live within their culture with people who are the same as them. Okay. And even then they don't get along. I mean, I'm absolutely sick to death of all of these debates missing the fact of human nature and the simplicity that even people who are friends don't always get along.
Nasser and Ali, essentially what David is saying is that, people at its core has the ability to hate other people. I mean, do you feel that what David is saying is possibly divisive? And do you subscribe to his idea that there needs to be a sort of overarching dominant culture? And does this feed into the narrative of growing Islamophobia in Australia?
Look, I think as far as any culture in Australia is concerned, I believe no culture tries to override the law of Australia. Nobody breaks the law in practicing their culture in Australia, and nobody wants to change the nature of Australia. The reason it's called Islamophobia is because people who are against Islam and who are against Muslims use this phobia that somehow Islam and Muslims are going to fundamentally change Australia and create this threat, which is divisive. Yes, people may disagree, but this is not just a simple disagreement. This is a concentrated effort to scare people of those who are different using these examples and terms like people are here to change our culture and country. Nobody's here to change the country. We follow the law. We all want to follow the law, no matter where people have come from, what country they've come from, what culture they belong to. So, I think the way David understands and describes this issue is in itself problematic. And I believe that is what causes phobia.
Nasser, I mean, I want to bring you back into this conversation. One of the things that you do really well is actually develop sustainable strategies. Do you feel that what David has been saying is constructive?
I think what David has been saying is part of the policy of the party in terms of collecting votes for people who just being like misinformed and disinformed, so that they can get the votes of those people based on discrimination and based on segregating people, based on disseminating that kind of phobia from it is Islamophobia or xenophobia, phobia from the other. That's the problem here. We need to understand that we are all Australians. We are all under the law.
Don't you represent a party that subscribes to a general notion that Muslim votes count? I mean, currently in Australia, we have an ex-senator from the Labor Party who is establishing her own party based on Islam. So essentially, we would
No, she's not. No, David, that's incorrect.
No, that's not true.
She's not. David, that's incorrect.
No, David, look,
gentlemen,
you've been cutting us.
Let's actually, Nasser, let's actually let David finish up what he's trying to say, and then we'll get you back in.
We have Islamic groups. Look, I'm not here to argue against Islam or against, Judaism or any of these things. I'm simply putting matters the way they are. If there's any hypocrisy related, it's in all the factor that we have here in Australia now, people wanting to establish parties that are essentially vote for us because we're Muslim. All Muslims should vote for us. That in itself is divisive in a democracy. It's the same as saying everyone who is of Asian descent has to vote for a certain party because they're Asian, or all the white Australians have to vote for a white party, and all of the Aboriginal people have to vote for an Aboriginal party. That is the breakdown of multiculturalism, and that in itself is clearly wrong. So, look, I'm sorry, but at least one of you gentlemen, I'm not sure who, represents this scenario of Muslims voting for Muslims.
Nasser, I mean,
I'm sorry if your culture fails to recognise that in itself is against the core values of a Western democracy, which is what Australia is. And if you're not willing to live under the structure of a Western democracy, then you need to live somewhere else. Just the same as in Islamic countries, it is understood
You've
and
just-
should be so that if you want to live there,
Yeah.
you live under those laws and under those structures. If I was going to live in Saudi Arabia,
David.
I wouldn't start a
David,
requiring.
I understand your point.
David, that is.
Sorry for interrupting you, but I get your point. Nasser, I mean, you have to see at least the merit in what David was saying with regards to the votes. What do you have to say to that?
In fact, there is no merit. That's exactly a proof of disinformation and misinformation. Because what David said is that we call Muslims to vote for Muslims, and we don't have, at a specific place as Muslim votes matter, we don't have any candidate to vote for as Muslim. And he used his misinformation as well to give this votes for those specific set of people who would love to hear these words, this misinformation, to capitalize on it, to get the votes for his party or for the One Nation or for the same
I don't have a party.
Look, you have proved it. Whatever it is, David, you have connection. You have connections. You have connections to parties, David.
I'm a retired parliamentarian.
You have connection.
I don't.
You have connections, David.
I'm not a member.
You have
of
connections.
Can I
Gentlemen,
just
all
quickly
right,
jump in?
Ali Kadri.
Now,
Ali Kadri, let me get you.
Brother Nasser, please. David, I want to ask you a question. Look, what are your thoughts on Australian Christian lobby trying to lobby the politicians of the secular country of Australia to pass laws which are Christian friendly? What do you think about that? Isn't that changing the nature or the fundamental nature of our country? Because it's a secular democracy.
Because the way that a democracy such as Australia works allows exactly the same thing for Muslims or for Falun Gong.
So how is Muslim votes matter different then?
To make the lobby as they do.
But look, how is Muslim votes matter different?
But I think both of you
let me finish.
fail to actually understand the way Australian parliamentary system and the political system works.
Let me finish. I will agree with you. I don't agree with Muslim votes matter as a Muslim. I don't agree with Christian lobby as an Australian. I don't agree with it. However, I believe every Australian has a right to lobby the government to pass legislations which are suitable for that community. Now, if Muslim votes matter is trying, then what's wrong with it? Why are you singling Muslim votes matter out while giving a free pass?
I'm not singling anybody out. I'm responding to the allegation that I am somehow divisive by pointing out the hypocrisy related to trying to gather groups of people based on their religion or race into groups. Now, once again,
like ACL.
I'm sorry.
Like ACL
you should be having this argument with somebody who is a member of the Christian lobby. I am a retired parliamentarian who understands the system, who is aware of the circumstances and what takes place in the nation and how it operates.
What are your thoughts on ACL? ACL is doing the same wrong thing? Are they allowed to do what they're doing? Or they should be, they're doing the right thing, following the culture? Does ACL have a right to do what they're doing in Australia without being called out by yourself or people who are retired politicians or whoever it is? Do they have a right not to be called out? Why did you just single out Muslim votes matter?
I didn't single out anybody. Goodness, if you've not got a memory of what you've said yourself, I've not singled out anybody. I have merely responded to allegations that the two of you make. Firstly, in the false sense that you think I represent some group, or I'm trying to garner votes for my party. I don't have a party. I don't represent a group.
I don't think so. I don't think you did. No.
I'm merely responding to the things you are saying.
David, all right. I understand how you're trying to sort of distance yourself from the argument in terms of your former political identity. I get that. But just in terms of utilizing the limited time that we have as effectively as we can. Ali, let me turn to you. I mean, David was saying he's aware of the system. I mean, who bears the brunt of the responsibility here? I mean, is it sort of the government, past, present, or is it sort of more grassroots communities? Because you've also been outspoken about this too.
Yeah, look, I think government has a responsibility, but the government has a responsibility to try and create healthy dialogue between communities, so these kind of hatred does not flow onto the streets, onto our places of worship, onto our wives, onto our mothers, onto our daughters. So effectively, government has a responsibility, but the ultimate responsibility, ultimate solution to this problem is for communities to come together and discuss. We are all Australians, regardless of what faith we have, what skin color we have. And if we live here long enough, we'll all be same color with our sun. So, you know, I think we are all Australians in it together. I don't think it's one community's responsibility. It's the responsibility of the whole country to come together and speak out firmly against Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, or any form of racism.
Okay, I mean, Nasser, I mean, to address a problem, you have to fully understand the topic. I mean, you've actually had former prime ministers of the country come out and say, look, simply, we don't understand what the religion is. I mean, how do you address something when you actually have a tacit admission by somebody at the very top of the government admitting something like this?
Well, admitting is something, and being fair when treating with dealing with it is another thing. For example, like there was an attack on a synagogue a couple of weeks ago, and that should be condemned. Whoever they do of the action, but there was also a fire set onto in a bus, a school bus, an Islamic school bus, and the reaction of the government was disproportionate, was not equal. What their reaction to the synagogue and what happened and the aftermath was totally different from their reaction to what happened to this Islamic school bus. Even the media coverage, Australian media coverage was totally biased regarding that action of the attack on the synagogue and the Islamic school bus. And also there was, like a couple of days ago, probably yesterday, there was an attack in Bankstown, an Islamophobic attack against a Muslim lady in Bankstown in Sydney. And look, it's not being covered. Like they just ignored it. The thing about it is that we all know that we understand that sometimes the government may go and talk some kind of nice words here and there, but the actions on the ground, in reality, there is no equal action. There is nothing called like something like equality in terms of the reaction, in terms of the outrage they should deal with this thing when it comes to attacks against Muslims.
I mean, but Nasser, forget about the fact that you actually have organizations reporting incidences related to our topic, but you actually have the government appointing a very top-level official, an envoy to deal with this. I mean, that is saying something.
Well, that's something just fresh. It's just been, Islamophobia has been there since September 11, 2001. And now you tell me that it's a very late action. It's a very late, I would say, reaction. So it's been there just for 2 months. I met with Dr. Malik after. He's a nice person. He's trying to do something, but still it's just his organization, his whole thing is just very infant. He's not even, he couldn't go and talk about it even now, so far, for what happened over the past 2 weeks, because he's still setting up the organization he's working on.
Yeah, David, so, I don't have a lot of time too, but I also want to get you in.
Yes, can I just make two quite salient points which surprised me haven't been made? The first one is that no matter which group you talk to, each of them is going to feel they've been hardly done by and not held up respectfully with what's taken place. In that, I can point out to you, and you won't like this, but the Australian government is quite ingenuine in all of this. The Australian government wants Muslim votes and they want Jewish money. So they play a down-the-middle scenario of not trying to side with either. Now, the last thing I'd like to say is that I'm surprised we haven't looked at the most important factor is why there is a rise in anti-Semitism and in Islamophobia in Australia. And it's quite simply, the elephant in the room. It's what's taking place with Israel and Gaza. I mean, that's all there is to it. All of that fight has spilled over into Australia, the same as it has spilled over into so many other countries. And that is the answer to why there is the rise. And I don't really understand why we didn't get to why is this happening at the beginning? Why is it that since roughly October 7, 2023, there's been this massive increase of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and that is the answer.
I mean, now, David, to be all fair, I thought that was pretty obvious when we made our references to October the 7th that this was obviously linked.
Yeah, well,
okay.
What is considered as anti-Semitism is there is a misconception about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Here there's a mix, because those guys, they consider anything against anti-Zionism, which is a colonial project, occupying Palestine saying that if you say anything against Zionism, then you have anti-Semitic in this case. We need to differentiate between these two concepts, David. We need to say that the Australian government has not upheld the international law in condemning or at least doing something, for example, the arrest of warrants against Netanyahu and his defense minister. We need to recognize that the Australian government, for example, has not upheld the international law or the ICC or the ICJ rulings.
This is a conversation that can go in many different directions, gentlemen. I hope that we can actually continue this discussion, this debate at a different time on a different platform. But thank you very much, Nasser Alziyadat, Ali Kadri, and David Oldfield for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Do appreciate your time. Thank you. Well, thanks for watching us. You can follow us on Twitter and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Adi Chanayanda, and we'll see you next time.